Yeah, I'm very happy to introduce you Corine Pelluchon. She's from Paris. She is a philosopher and she's teaching at the Gustav Eiffel University in Paris. And in 2020, she got the Günter Anders Prize for her thinking and the critical thinking about the, society. And she published a lot of books. So her new book is on the table. It's called in the German Der Durchgang des Unmöglichen, Hoffnung in Zeiten der Klimakatastrophe. Thank you very much, Corinne, that you came here from Paris today. And I heard you in Koblenz. I'm very, very curious about your talk, and it's your stage. And yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation. So I will state the general project of a book which was published in German and on New Enlightenment, and I will indicate the challenge I have sought to take up, how to defend the Enlightenment in the social, ecological, technological and political context when its project of individual and collective emancipation is under attack from all sides, from the right as well as from the left. How can the Enlightenment be defended after the tragedies of the 20th century, after Auschwitz and Hiroshima, after the colonial crimes that led to the suspicion that all universalism is imperialist? Not to mention the ecological, sanitary and economic counterproductivity of all development models. And why do we need to defend Enlightenment, especially when we advocate radical changes, as I do, in our way of understanding or inhabiting the earth and interacting with other beings, especially with animals? And in the first point, I will distinguish the anti-Enlightenment from the criticism coming from postmodernism and from feminists and post-colonial studies. And I will try to show that the critiques that postmodernism has addressed to the past Enlightenment were fair and that we have to take into account. In the second point, I will introduce the resources I use to promote a non-hegemonic rationalism and a new Enlightenment. And I will refer to phenomenology, especially to phenomenology in Merleau-Ponty. In a third point, I will say why we need to defend Enlightenment while acknowledging that a lot of events and epistemological changes separate us from the past Enlightenment. And to be true, it is Enlightenment after the collapse of Enlightenment. In a fourth point, I will quickly establish my diagnosis by making a kind of genealogy of nihilism, aiming to explain the inversion of progress into regression, for which Enlightenment of the 18th century was not responsible, but from which it has not preserved us. I will speak of a double imputation of reason that goes back to the instrumental rationalism, as Adorno and Horkheimer said, but also to a more original separation between reason and nature. And this dualism between nature and culture, and maybe the repression of our own nature, is a vice of our civilization, which is common to Enlightenment and the anti-Enlightenment. And I will introduce the two major categories I have tried to introduce, the notion of scheme as well as the notion of civilizational epoche. Forgive me for this jargon, but I will explain. And last, I will try to find out why the new Enlightenment is ecological, why ecology understood as the wisdom of our inhabitation of the earth, as a kind of existence, not only ecology which is not to be reduced to the fight against climate change, but which has also social and existential meaning linked to a subjectivity. Why does ecology as an emancipatory force, and why does it require a decentering of democracy? So first point, maybe it's things that you know, but I think it's was to remind us of this. The Enlightenment, as Michel Foucault says, refers less to a century or a continent than to an attitude, an ethos that is characterized by a critical relationship with the present. In fact, this reflexivity makes it possible to become aware of the dangers and the challenges of the present in order to try to renew the link between theory and practice. Well, the idea is that the future is not fixed and that it depends on the way in which meaning is established by freeing oneself from false or outdated representations. This, of course, testifies to the importance of freedom of thought, but enlightenment is an unfinished or ongoing process by which at every age, in every age and on several continents, some human beings try to affirm the value of freedom and to provide some guidelines for social changes, while again identifying the specific challenges and the practices to change and acknowledging also the obstacles and the dangers, because enlightenment is always defined by what it fights against. So it is an ethos, an attitude, but it has also a content, or said in a different way, there are some principles or some pillars that are characteristic for enlightenment, which is an intellectual structures, which is always connected with a political project. So I will remind you of these four, maybe pillars or principles, which we have probably to reconfigure or to weiter machen, to think differently. So the first one is the autonomy, which means that enlightenment is always associated with a project of society that bases social and political organization on the freedom of subjects and not on a hierarchical or theocratic order. So the importance of freedom of thought goes hand in hand with the recognition of the moral equality of persons, as well as with the project of establishing a society based on this equality and dignity. So autonomy first, the democratic ideal or republic ideal, the idea that it's a matter of equality, dynamics of equality, and this goes hand in hand with the idea that humanity is one, third principle. And finally, the enlightenment is connected with the affirmation of the importance of reason, but of course in the current context, and is a critique of modernity, which Adorno, Horkheimer, and Marcuse made. We have to point out the fact that there is a reversal of rationality into irrationality, and that rationality sometimes is irrational. And we have to understand why we reach this point, which of course gave birth to a lot of phenomena which were terrible in the 20th century. So these four pillars are opposed point by point by the anti-enlightenment, which defends a contrary project of society based on a hierarchical order founded on tradition and on essentialism. That is to say that it justifies the subjugation of certain beings by others and even nourishes racist prejudices. So the anti-enlightenment rejects equality, restricts the individual to his or her biological affiliation, and conducts identity politics that are contrary to the pluralism that constitute democracy. Its contempt for human rights feeds its nationalism and even its xenophobia, and the anti-enlightenment also believes that particular communities are not compatible. Finally, the anti-enlightenment displays a contempt for reason that feeds the rejection of mediation, that is, traditional channels of knowledge and representative institutions. and this benefits conspiracy and populism. As you see, enlightenment and anti-enlightenment are intellectual structures. They were born at the same time, but I focus less on their historical forms than on the intellectual structures they stand for, and they are characterized by some traits we find in the diverse forms they take over time, because of course they take new form. I will just say a little about this. But the Enlightenment is also criticized on the left by the postmodernists. However, the postmodernist has nothing to do with anti-enlightenment. Indeed, feminists and postcolonial rightly accuse the past enlightenment of having been hegemonic and blind to differences. However, their criticism that aims to denounce the violence of Enlightenment rationalism does not lead to the rejection of the Enlightenment's project of establishing an inclusive society. On the contrary, it is on behalf of the Enlightenment ideals, freedom, equality, justice, that postmodernists denounce the false universalism of the past Enlightenment. Universalism that was a way of imposing a partial point of view by hiding itself behind supposedly general principles. So the criticism of the postmodernism must be taken seriously. However, it is not because posthumanism is based on anthropocentrism that the universalism of the past Enlightenment is blind to differences. It is not because the universalism of past enlightenment is blind to differences that we must abandon any universalizable principles or ideals. Because if we throw all universalizable ideals overboard, we will not be able to build a common project and fight against global warming, the scourges of economism, the drifts of technology, the fact that the unlimited ends are like the unlimited means, as Gunther Anders said, are ends, the rise of nationalism. So we need universalizable reference points. It's necessary to think about what we have in common instead of focusing on what sets us apart. But, and moreover, relativism and everything that weakens the universalism can benefit the anti-enlightenment. But the second point is how to pretend to build a universalism that is not arrogant, overbearing, hegemonic, Eurocentrist, and blind to difference. What are the tools, that are the resources that we have in order to maybe save rationalism from its inner negative dialectic? My answer, and I also be quick because, but it's, my answer is that phenomenology, especially phenomenology of corporeality, and I will say what is this approach. Especially the phenomenology of corporeality can help us meet this challenge, which is very important today because there is a war between, on the one hand, the old universalism, which is patriarchal, overbearing, and on the other hand, the postmodernists who open our eyes on the false universalism of the past, but who sometimes reinstall the dominion they accuse and cannot help us build a common project and fight against the current challenges which are terrible. So why do I refer to phenomenology, and what is phenomenology? Because I'm not sure that everybody knows this. So phenomenology is an approach, a philosophical approach, born at the beginning of the 20th century, thanks to Edmund Husserl. But it's a method and an experience which enables us to apprehend the things, the phenomena, and the reality by avoiding two dead ends. The first dead end is, well, naturalism, objectivism. That is to say that well, we all have glasses that make us see the world in a certain way. And when we believe that what we see is reality in itself, it's a kind of naturalism, a naive objectivism. And the other deadline is to say that everything is relative to my impressions. There is nothing objective, nothing. So what does phenomenology? It's a kind of description of the way things or beings appear to me, or given to me or not. For instance, I can see and I can describe a thing, and at the beginning Husserl has a perspective which was close to, well, his aim was to describe the essence of things, but if you refer to some phenomena which escape my consciousness, which are always more than what I see or feel, if you describe, if you meet, for instance, you encounter another being, another human being, you can see that is not an object, that he escapes your consciousness. Your power to constitute him is always more than what you know from him. This is why, by the way, Emmanuel Levinas said that the author has a face. He is a face and is not an object. So sometimes things are not given to us, or they are given to us in a paradoxical way, and this way to this focus on the way things are given or not to me makes me understand what is the meaning of these things. Not the truth, but the way I can interact with them, and to refer to the encounter of the author's face. The fact that I cannot grasp him, that I cannot constitute him, that the author sets limits to my power to constitute him, introduce me to a dimension in my relation to the other being, and this dimension is exactly what Levinas says, calls ethics. That is to say that ethics is a matter of accepting the limits that the author sets to my right to use whatever I want, whatever pleases me. So in phenomenology, there is two operations. The first is to put into bracket the natural attitude, which consists in having ideas, beliefs, without knowing that they are simple beliefs. And the second is a return to the act of consciousness by which things are given to us, and to discover the layers of the real, which are diverse and unsuspected. That is to say that this description enriches our way of apprehending things and understanding the meaning, not the truth. That is to say, the relation we have with the authors. So, and what did I do? I focus, I follow Levinas' step by focusing on phenomena that escape my power to constitute, and that show my passivity, such as, of course, the author, but also my death, my aging, food. And when we describe human condition, human existence, by focusing on its corporeality, we understand that food is not an object of my consciousness. It's a condition of my existence, and it pleases me. There is a complacency in the things, but when I'm tired, it's not something I wanted. There's a passivity. And so the taking into account of human existence with the taking into account or the description of human existence in light of its corporeality shed lights to human condition and show that we have a vulnerability, that is to say that we need the author's care, but also that we are always in relation with authors, including with animals, especially when we live somewhere or when we are eating. We are always in contact with other beings. So you see that the phenomenological description of human condition have far-reaching political consequences, because it's not values, it's not subjective, but it's structures of existence that show that, for instance, the justice toward animals and the protection of the biosphere, which is a condition of my existence, are part of the political, are some political ends. That is to say that the political goals are not to be reduced to the security between us, nor to the reduction of unfair inequalities, but the protection of the finite biosphere, and also the fact that landscapes and so on are not only tools for us, but nourish my life, or give my life a meaning and a savor or not. And justice toward other beings, or including animals, are part of my life and part of the social contract to a certain extent, because the reconstruction of the political theory will be based on a subject which is not only understood in light of freedom, but which is understood in light of our corporeality and the materiality of our existence. That is to say, in light of our dependence upon the others and upon elements and ecosystems. So, this way of articulating a phenomenology of existence and ecology is a tool which can be applied in different contexts, but it gives reference marks to think differently the politics. And lastly, you find in Merleau-Ponty a way of insisting upon the heterogeneity of the accesses to reality, because he said that animals too are subjects. Of course, they are not representative subjects. They don't prefer Kant or Hegel, but they have an intentionality. That is to say that they shape the world, and it's not possible to understand the world such as they perceive it, but it's possible to understand that they perceive the world in a certain way. So there is one world, but a multiplicity of ways of shaping the world, and this gives rise to phenomenology, a universalism which is lateral, as Merleau-Ponty said. That is to say that we have different layers of reality and different culture, different forms of life, which reveal layers of reality, but one world, one. So you have some tool which come from philosophy, which can enable us to have a rationality which is not overbearing, but which starts with our experience. And but the third point, which is very important, why do I would like to renew or to save enlightenment? Because a lot of people who advocate, who are activists in ecology or in animal cause, reject the tradition of enlightenment. Some of them say that Descartes, but also Kant, were responsible for the situation we have. And how do I dare to speak of enlightenment in the context of today's technoscience, and while you can't stop thinking of the daily massacre of animals worldwide. So are there some historical and epistemological breaks between what would be a new enlightenment and the enlightenment of the past? Of course, there are, and I will speak a little bit of that. But first, I would like to say that it's important to speak of enlightenment, because not only because it is under attack by the anti-enlightenment, and this attack has concrete manifestation, such as the reawakening of rationalism almost everywhere, xenophobia, the theocratic temptation in some countries, but also transhumanism, which pertains for me to anti-enlightenment, because transhumanism is opposed to autonomy. The future is fixed and does no longer need us. An individual is riveted to his or her technological equipment, which replaces the essentialism of yesteryear. And transhumanism does not foster democratic society, nor it is not a project of emancipation. It illustrates the reversal of rationality into mythology. So transhumanism presents itself as a legacy of the Enlightenment, but it is in fact a new form of this intellectual structure I refer when I spoke of anti-enlightenment. But if we must defend the Enlightenment, it is because the four pillars or principles I first mentioned, autonomy, democracy, the unity of humanity and rationality, these four pillars still make sense. However, it's very important to reconfigure these notions. For instance, autonomy has to be reconfigured in light of our vulnerability and interdependence. We have also to articulate it to responsibility, and to a responsibility whose structures has changed, because as Günther Anders said, we are not only responsible for the other whose face is the other which we can encounter, but because of the technology and the fact that our modes of life have effects that go beyond our present time, we are responsible for future generations and for people who are not yet born and whose face we do not see. That is to say that we are responsible for people which we do not know, and it's very difficult to feel responsible for them, although the challenge is to reduce this gap between what we are doing and the consequences of our modes of life and technologies. And human rights are still very important, but of course our freedom is modified from within by the sense of responsibility toward future generations and other species. And this is why the foundations of human rights today are not only the atomistic subject, which was understood in light of his freedom, understood as a capacity of making changes and of making choices and change them, but it's an invested freedom. It's the fact that the limits to my right to do whatever I please is not only the current human being, but also the future generation and other species. Why? Because to a certain extent, I have these beings in myself. When I speak of the corporeality, the materiality of my existence, there is always, my life is always intertwined with the life of other beings. So, and we need a new way of speaking of enlightenment, which will foster these principles of the past enlightenment while reconfiguring them. But of course, this enlightenment is new because there is a gap, a break between the past and the present. It's enlightenment, as I said, after the collapse of enlightenment, after we understand the destructiveness of man, of human being. The optimism of the heroes of past enlightenment does no longer make sense after Auschwitz, Hiroshima, and in the context of climate change. And we know also that reason has been a weapon of our own destruction. So the genealogy of nihilism and the crisis of our times require an inquiry into reason. Why has reason been lost in the course of modernity and in an accelerated way? why has it been cut off from the questioning of what is worth? And so it's very, before I speak of this genealogy of nihilism and the diagnosis I try to provide, I would like just to say a few words on this wounded enlightenment or wounded humanism I try to promote. I speak of humanism, that is to say that not only creativity and freedom are very important, but humanism means that I start with human being to change our model of development. That is to say that this way of speaking is quite different from what we have in environmental and animal ethics, in ecocentrism, or in animal ethics in Peter Singer and so forth. Ecocentrism in Pelluchon, in Aldo Leopold, and even in Annes, the great philosopher of environment in Norwegia, they have platform of norms. They start with nature, with what the ecosystems need. And of course, this is very important. They have decentered ethics and provide some guidelines to understand what we have to do in order to stop destroying nature and ecosystems. But I think that it's very important to articulate a philosophy of existence with ecology in order to avoid a kind of dualism between nature and culture, human and animals, and human and ecosystems, that environmental ethics have sometimes reinstalled. But of course, this humanism is a humanism of alterity and diversity. That is to say that it is not grounded upon an elitist, patriarchal, and Eurocentric image of human being, and the taking into the fact that the vulnerability and the materiality of our existence, and which show also what we have in common with other animals, is at the core of this humanism, which can, in this way, escape the critiques that Lévi-Strauss rightly addressed to the past humanism, which was based upon a radical separation between human and animals, which opened a vicious circle, and which he said in 1973 that it was responsible for all the misery, all the tragedies of the 20th century. And I will say that it opened up a culture of death. We have also some intuitions like that in Adorno or Horkheimer. That is to say that the animal cause is of course important in itself, but it has also a strategic dimension, because the radical separation with other beings which are reduced to their body as something, this violence upon them is like a mirror of our vice, of the vice of our civilization that I think the New Enlightenment has to eradicate. So, for the genealogy of nihilism, one of my hypotheses is that there is a double amputation of reason. In the 18th century, reason was still the organ of the universal. Think of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But, and Horkheimer says that in Eclipse of Reason, because we cannot make a non-historical history of reason. But when the true became confused with the useful, reasons lost any ability to distinguish between fair and unfair, between right and wrong. It has lost any universalizable dimension. It became a mean for the sake of the individual, a mean for its satisfaction. Reduced to its functionality, to efficiency, reason became an instrument of calculation. this instrumental rationalism, you know perfectly, led to the reification of human and living beings. So they are right. But in a more original way, the separation of reason and nature that is characteristic of the West, to a certain extent, is the vice of our civilization. For me, and I borrow an intuition we find in Dialectique der Aufklärung in Adorno Horkheimer, but it's very subtle, when he says that there is reason is in the stranglehold of domination, which is a threefold domination. Domination upon others, but also domination upon nature outside us, and domination upon own nature. And I do think that there is a more original imputation of reason which explains why there is this reversal of progress into regression, and why we reach this point, which does not mean that the worm was in the fruit, but there is the repression of our own nature and of what we have in common with animals, the repression of our vulnerability and mortality, explain that reason became also this instrument of dominion, this obsession of control, and to taking into account our earthly, carnal, and mortal condition allows or could allow us to get reason out of this domination, which is again a threefold domination, which explain the desire we have to exert one's power over the other. I coin a concept by changing a little bit a word we find in Kant and in life, scheme, shame, and because shame in Kant is the link between the sensible and the intellectual, and it refers to imagination. And for me, I wanted to understand the common points between some phenomena which are quite different, but which all have in common this domination. And communism, totalitarianism, excuse me, Nazi, but also the destruction of nature. Of course, it's quite different, but there is something in common. And I coin a word, a scheme, it's capitalism, but it's quite different, but there is something in common. And for me, the scheme is an organizing principle of a society. It's a set of conscious and unconscious representations that determine our social, economic, and political choices. It's a matrix that organizes the modes of production, assigns a value to certain activities and objects, and intrudes into our minds, conditioning behavior and colonizing the imaginary. Because, of course, as it was said before, how can we understand that we continue to nourish capitalism in spite of all its social, economic, sanitary, and so forth counterproductivities? So the scheme of domination, the scheme is a device, a dynamic device, and the organizational structure of the actions of process it designates is linked to the imagination, which connects representation and affect. To speak of a scheme of a society is to say that we are dealing with something coherent, which imposes a development model and impregnates a civilization. So for me, the society is governed by the scheme of domination, which implies a predatory relationship with nature, the commodification of the living, and even of oneself, and constant competition, the need to crush others in order to feel that one exists, and the obsession with mastery and external control. This is domination. That is to say that the scheme of domination transforms everything in war. breeding, agriculture, power, social life, love. In all times, the scheme of domination takes the form of financial capitalism, which is an organization structures around the rule of profit and the subordination of all activities to the economy. But to coin this notion, which is a heuristic, was a way to say that to denounce capitalism does not suffice, because domination is deeply uprooted in us. This is why capitalism is so successful, in spite of all its counterproductivities. And the way of speaking of a scheme enables us to understand the link between phenomena which are quite different, such as capitalism, bureaucratization, totalitarianism, but all these phenomena have in common the fact that they foster the quantification of beings, their reification and our own reification. And if we want to promote another model of development, we have to eradicate the scheme that is claimed. And also, this notion of scheme enables me to say that if we identify it, we of course say that we suffer from it, but we also recognize that we are also the origins of it. We are the instituting power, to speak like Cornelius Castoriadis. So we can depose what we have instituted. And this is the meaning of emancipation. So if we dare to speak of a new enlightenment, it implies dethroning this scheme of domination. Of course, it's not very easy nor quick, but this requires undertaking a work of oneself that I have described in the first book. But not only, there is a link between the social structures and the subjectivity, the psyche. And this is why there is an anthropological revolution which is at stake. And for me, it has to do with the way we perceive us, and we perceive us as living beings in our corporeality, in our vulnerability, that we accept our vulnerability, finitude, because if we do not accept this, how can we set limits to our right to do whatever we please for the sake of other beings and future generation? How can we accept to transform economy and respect the limits of the biosphere, the planet, if we do not recognize deeply our finitude and our limits? And this is very, of course, important, and I cannot summarize the importance of the overcoming of the denial of death in this way of giving birth to more mature human beings and a more mature society. So I do not say that everything is on the shoulder of the individuals. Of course, there are some structural change in the economy, in modes of production, but without individual lifestyles in a democracy, and without a transforming of subjectivity, an enlargement of subjectivity, which explains that the well-being, the flourishing of other beings is part of your own flourishing, without the carnal or very deep awareness of your belonging to a common world, which welcomes you when you are born, and which is older and bigger than you, and which is built by the older generations and the natural and cultural heritage. And Noreinmal, again, it is not a value nor a fantasy, but the taking into account of our begotten status, the fact that we are engendered, shed lights on our the intertwinedness of our lives, and it shed lights on the common world. You know that Hannah Arendt focused on the common world, and it is by thinking of our birth and what the birth means for a human being or for a being. It means that you belong to a world which is older than you. And that you have to preserve it and to renew it. And this is very demanding, and it requires, of course, some education and some social and political structures. So, but, and for me, of course, this common world, it's encompasses also the natural heritage, and when I deepen my knowledge as, of myself as a carnal, begotten, vulnerable person, being, the consciousness of my belonging to a common world becomes something which changed from within my way of perceiving myself and interacting with the others. I do not have the desire to control the others or to exert my power over them. This is what I call transcendence, because the common world is a transcendence in immanence. And again, I borrow this to Hannah Arendt. It's not God, it's not a contemplation, transcendence, but the deep, it's me, but the deepening of my condition as carnal being that opens me to this transcendence in immanence. And transcendence in immanence is, you find it in Hannah Arendt when she speaks of the common world. And she said that a politics which neglects this common world is not a politics, it's only policies. So, you know that she also, like Carl Schmitt, this Schlechterger, they use this distinction between politics and policies. So, for me, if there is an anthropological revolution which is underway, and the animal cause, the interest of a most growing number of people for ecology and feminism, again, are very important in themselves, but they have this strategic dimension because they testify to the desire to understand one's place and to give room to others. It's a way of understanding, it's the wish to inhabitate the earth differently and to interact with the otherness differently, without dominion, of course. The run is long, it's difficult, but there is this harbingers or precursory signs of a new age, which I call the age of the living. And remember when I started this lecture, I said that enlightenment is less a set of doctrines or continent, it's an attitude. And this attitude is not only characterized by the fact that you try to identify the challenges and the danger of the present, it is also a way of naming your present, giving it a name and trying to find a direction to orient or reorient the future and to get out this mess in which we are, and for me, which massacre of animals silently reflect. So, if we have to understand the new enlightenment, it requires the removal of the scheme of domination and the organization of society from the scheme of consideration, which implies the preservation of the common world, as defined previously, and the way of fostering creativity and freedom. But of course, the scheme of consideration, which implies this enlargement of the self and the ability to make room for other beings, and you see the link between representations, emotions or affects more precisely, and values and behavior. The scheme of the consideration was still there. I do not invent it, but it was sleeping and recovered by the scheme of domination which impregnates our soul. And the point was for me to understand what was technology, what was this or that under this scheme of domination. What kind of society made Auschwitz possible, said Marcuse. What kind of society made the atomic bomb possible and almost necessary, Günther Anders said. What kind of society could not make possible these things? This is the point. And for me, and I will be very quick, the point is the scheme was one important notion, but also civilizational epoche. That is to say that epoche comes from phenomenology, to put into bracket your beliefs and to change them. And of course, it makes sense at the individual level, but here it was at the collective level and in the West, because the West has problems a lot, but also some resources. And the point was to try to understand the present as an opportunity to make an inventory and carefully looking at each part of our lives and activities in order to formulate what are their meaning and what practices have to be suppressed or transformed because they betrayed their meaning. And phenomenology, again, is a resource to assess the meaning of things and to assess, to know whether the practices we have are contrary to the meaning of things. For instance, industrial farming is a nonsense when we think of what husbandry is and what animals are. So, but escaping a scheme is not an easy task, neither intellectually, morally, nor emotionally, not to mention the economic restructuring and the changes in political culture. But I think that it was the duty of a philosopher to accompany a movement. And why does the New Enlightenment, why is it radically ecological? What is the emancipatory force of ecology? Because ecology is not only the fight against climate change, it's a way of being, it's a way of inhabiting the earth and sharing not resources, what I call nourishment, all the things we live from and which nourishes our life. And it implies an understanding of my place in nature and my being with the world and with others. So it breaks with the nature-culture dualism and with the chauvinistic view. And also it fosters a sense of belonging to a common world, and it uproots anthropocentrism and the idea that everything exists is a mean to all ends. So in a nutshell, ecology, in light of a philosophy of our habitation of the world, in light of a phenomenology of corporeality and nourishment, renews anthropology. But at the same time, there is no way of understanding ecology and having an ecological behavior when one does not initiate this anthropological evolution. So the anthropological evolution, which is necessary to achieve what we today call ecological transition, is both the condition and the product of this new enlightenment. And in fact, ecology is a translation in the social and political order of what I call the scheme of consideration of this movement of emancipating oneself from updated and representations that led to this situation. And to the point is that our time obliged us to, I cannot say that in English, but to go very deeper without excuses nor compensations. And to look at the possibility of our impossibilities. This is why the understanding of our finitude, our death, and vulnerability is so important if we want to be able to become more sober, more mature, and change our development model, which has very radical individual and collective change, to start with the suppression of meat and flesh and so forth. So, and last, ecology goes hand in hand with the transformation of democracy. It is not only a question of politicizing ecology, but of ecologizing politics. And it changed everything when we consider ecology in the core of politics. It changed also the way we make an inventory of the situation, problems and resources, which are always different according to the territories. So we have to articulate the horizontal and vertical levels in a different way than in the current framework. And I will not develop here what would be a decentralizing of democracy. But again, this is a translation on a social and political level of a movement which I call the age of the living, and which I try to provide, to which I try to provide some tools. And it's my conclusion, I do not, it's not a top-down approach. In fact, the concern of a growing number of people for ecology, the deep sense of the world as a way of being with the world and with the others, are the harbingers of the age of the living. So an age that I do not create, but that I would like to accompany. And that is to say that phenomenology, as I understand it, does not speak of the world, but to the world. So the fact is to provide some guidelines by translating into a rational, but not only rational, way what is shown there, what is already there, but in some contradictions. And of course, the age of the living has manifestations which are sometimes weak, and there are a lot of opposing forces which are very, very strong. So I will finish by some words of Charles Péguy, who spoke of hope, espérance. In French, we have two words, espoir and espérance. Espoir is a personal wish, sometimes an illusion, a desire. Espérance is a theological virtue, which has nothing to do with my personal expectation, and which is something which I look to the future, to history, but also which for me requires the crossing of the negativity, the fact that it is always in spite of. And espérance is when you have lost all your illusions, you can be able to recognize the feeble signs, the precursory signs of something which is still a little bit there, but which could open an horizon of hope. And of course, to be able to look at the present in this way, you have to, again, to lose a lot of illusions, a lot of expectations, and to go through the negativity, which I think, and I will explain if you ask me, which is very important today, and to a certain extent, the possibility of the impossibility, climate change, which is not only something that is a threat to our survival, but also it points out the drifts of our civilization is an opportunity, and maybe more than that, it requires that we put into question a lot of things, and we have a rendezvous with very important questions concerning human condition, or earthly and finite condition. So, but hope is an energy, something unexpected. And Charles Péguy compares hope to a little girl who skips along between her two sisters' face, which he compared to a wife, and caritas, love, who he compared to a mother. And he says this little girl, whom nobody noticed, because hope is not spectacular, she can see what will be and love what will be, and she drags her old sister along. And I think this is not the energy of despair, but this is, I think, also something we find in enlightenment, a new enlightenment which is radically wounded, but which has also this energy, which is not a pathological energy, because it is not built upon what divides us, but upon the lines of similitude et différence, comme disait Derrida, the lines of similitude and differences that are between us and between different species. Thank you very much.
utilized you in German?
Ja, ja, beide.
Okay.
Ja, ja.
Okay. Thank you very much, Corinne, for what is the idea from the New Enlightenment? So, have we a chance to get a new enlightenment, in your opinion?
Do we have a chance?
Yeah.
I think it's already there, but it's not very spectacular. And because I do think the point will be like Marcuse, what is progress with meaning? I do think that the interest for animals is revolutionary, could be revolutionary, and it could be the image of a new enlightenment. But of course, today we are in a night. There are and the opposing forces, all the things which people already today refer, nationalism, the regressions, and also, but it's dominion. Dominion is everywhere. The war is everywhere. So new enlightenment is a project of emancipation. This is why I think I wrote this book, Das Zeitalter des Lebendigen and the New Philosophy der Aufklärung, because I was, on the one hand, very conscious of the dangers, political, fascism, which is here almost, and also because I was very anxious because my friends, the animal activists, and I am too, the ecologists, were rejecting any idea of universalism and enlightenment, as if Descartes were responsible for Hiroshima, which is an historical mistake. So, but also, and finally, there are a lot of people who reject the Western. Well, of course, West. What is the West? It has welcomed a lot of traditions, but who say that we have to refer to Urvölker, peuple primitif. And I think that we also have resources in all traditions, but of course we have to make a self-critique of enlightenment, and more, deeper, a critique of this vice of our civilization, which was this false, arrogant, and violent humanism that Claude Lévi-Strauss and Derrida rightly deconstructed. So it was a way to say this and to propose a political project which will be ecology as new enlightenment, but not as an ideology, because ecology is not only it's not sustainable development, of course. It's not green capitalism, of course. But it's not only some norms, some coercion, some... I've been working on ecology for 15 years, and I have seen that some people come to say that we only we have to force people to change their lifestyles. And I think this is also a danger, but I think that ecology has an emancipatory force, and I try to say that, to build a project of society with a philosophical foundation. And well, this was so the new enlightenment is not here, but we can, in spite of all things, in spite of negativity and despair, we can have this. Well, it's a duty to look at this and to say, well, and again, and it will be my last word, when I've started to work on animals and ecology, well, some of my colleagues were laughing at me, and now I know that, I realize that everybody speaks of ecology. Unfortunately, there is nothing done for animals, but only words, but there is something which is there, and we have to accompany. And the great Spinoza, they have they have written things for what we all now call liberal democracy. So I think we have the duty to promote some guidelines for the future, but by looking at the resources we have in the past and by changing them, reconfiguring some principles, and also with a kind of different style. So I think but it's very difficult because we are living in a time, in a society where everything is black or white and very dogmatic. And but emancipation makes sense. Of course, it's not only individual. Well.
Yeah, you're right. We are living in dark times, like our new book has a title on. Yeah, we will make a little bit more light because Tilman wants to give the camera, want to make some pictures from the people who ask questions. So I have a microphone here, and it would be good if you say your name and where you're coming from. There is, and you can also ask Corine in German if you want, okay, or in French.
No. In German, auf Deutsch, aber nicht so schnell, aber es macht mir Spaß zu sprechen.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Marcus Döller. I'm from the Max Weber Center in Erfurt, and my question is, I saw a tension in your talk that on the one side you describe universalizable normative criteria like autonomy, responsibility and rationality, but then in your second step you describe phenomenological conditions of all human beings, that there is a constitutive limit in not being able to control the other. But how is this two kind of approaches related to each other? Would you say there is a more constitutive universality we all share as human beings, which grounds the normative criteria? Or would you say there is also a tension between the way in which the hegemonial order, as you pointed out, deals with this universal normative criteria in capitalism? So how do these two approaches, the normative criteria you point out and the phenomenological description, relate to each other?
Yes, so your question is very, very relevant. And in Nourishment, the philosophy of the political body, which is one of my only book in English, I answer this question because, of course, phenomenology in itself, well, is an experience and a method. We will say it's not normative, but I try to but I try to show that it has a normative effect, because if we shed light on our human condition by, of course, acknowledging the freedom, the will, and so forth, but also the materiality of our existence and our corporeality, then it shed light upon our human condition, and we can no longer build the political theory upon the atomistic subject we find at the core of that underlies Hobbes or Rawls' philosophy, or even the philosophy of human rights at the beginning. So there are the underlying conception of the subject that is at the core of political theories, and I do not speak of social philosophy, but political theories, is sometimes mute, is not, and I wanted to do this job. But of course, it is not because you excavate this relational subject that you will immediately recognize that you have to draw the consequences of this cohabitation with the other beings. Of course, this is why in nourishment, I dare to combine a first part which was foundational and a second which was normative, while acknowledging the model of the social contract. And I explain why it's paradoxical, but I try to do it. And because it's not, you remember what Hobbes said, it is not because man knows something that he will obey. We have norms also, and the social contract, of course, is not the origin of society. It's a norm, not a fact. And I would just wanted to add that for me, because maybe it was in your question, I do not reject the importance of autonomy, freedom, existence as project, and the specificity of human species. I do not reject this, but I supplement the way we understand, we have been understanding human condition in our ethics and politics, and even in rights. And because when you look at the right or at the political theories, we now add ecology as something which is necessary for our survival, but we do not understand ecology as part of our life. Yeah. So I have to be, yes, short. This is very difficult to, but it's very important, this question. I'm not sure I have answered very quickly, but it's one of my book because it's a very important question. Yeah, excuse me. I will try to be short.
Okay. Yes, Stefan, one more question. Your concept of the new humanism in relationship with the ecological fight and feminism, etc. Is this your concept of the new humanism? Is this a dialectical concept? And if there is there a dialectic of enlightenment in your concept still? And if yes, where is exactly the dialectics in your concept of humanism? And if not, why not? No, why did you let behind
dialectical enlightenment?
Yes, if it's not a dialectic concept, why not? Why did you let behind the idea of dialectics of enlightenment from Horkheimer and Adorno? And if yes, where exactly is the
question is the difference between my diagnosis and the diagnosis of Adorno or Horkheimer in dialectic of Cleron?
Yes, in some way, but I didn't find exactly the dialectics in your concept of new humanism. So I'm not sure if I didn't find it or if this does not exist, or if it's just a dualistic concept of the good sides of humanism, the good side of universalism, and the bad sides, or if really it's a dialectic concept.
I think that there is a misunderstanding. How can I? No, I do not summarize. Where I have present something because I know that some people are not phenomenologists, so I try to give some guidelines. But when I speak of humanism, it is because if you speak of, if in the history of environmental ethics, you have biocentrism or ecocentrism, which are very important approaches, and we have the feeling that the human beings are cut from nature, animals, and so forth, as if we had to choose between humans and nature, humans and animals. And what I try to do is to propose a philosophy of existence by describing existence in light of inhabitation of the earth, which show that the milieu, the landscape, are part of our existence, that all the generations are part of our existence. So there is no dualism between nature, culture, human, animals, and so forth. And this is part of, and humanism implies that you start with human beings to protect nature, so to say. And but the word protection does not is not good. So, because there is two dead ends. This, well, we have to understand why after 50 years of great books in animal and environmental ethics, they did not succeed in making ecology and animals enter democracy and making people change their lifestyles. So I try to meet this challenge and to change the approach, because I said that in spite of the admiration I had for Calicut, of Peter Stinger and so forth, there are some lacks, there are some things. So, and I think that one of the things was to put, to build a philosophy of existence that put ecology and animals in our lives. So, but after, second answer, and I will stop, humanism, there is a history of the critique of humanism we find in postmodernism. The first postmodernists, such as Claude Lévi-Strauss in Structural Anthropology, too, in 1973, and Derrida, who said that there is a violent humanism which is based on a model of human being which is not universal at all, which is white man, which is cut from his animal condition. And again, Derrida has understood at the end of his life the strategic dimension of the animal question, which was at the core of the way we have built moral, juridical, and political frontiers between those whose death would be nothing and those who said, you shall not kill. So I think that this deconstruction, but you, after having deconstructed this false and arrogant humanism, you can, you have not to go throw overboard humanism, but you can to renew it. And I think that the philosophy of existence that is a philosophy of our habitation of the earth and of our inhabitation, cohabitation with the others, which shows this, this earthly condition, renew humanism and has far-reaching consequences concerning the way we interact and with other beings and make room for them. So it's, and this is something else than negative dialectic of Clairon. Dialectic of Clairon, it was a wonderful book with a lot of things. On the one hand, a critique of Homer. At the beginning, the worm was in from the beginning, and after a lot of things. But there were also this idea of the threefold domination, and there were also, well, some light. He said, we have to build a concept of Clairon, which is not destructive. But he did not do the job because he had no time. He has a lot of he has, well, the first generation, and as Lévi-Strauss and so forth, and Adorno-Camus, they had a lot of job to do to deconstruct all this mess. But we have to build. And I think it was my goal. And I adore Derrida, but I put me at the constructive side of the deconstruction. Because he did the great job. I have not to repeat it. But what will we do now? And how can we, what would be a state, an ethics, a politics, and a right, which takes seriously the fact that animals do count, that nature is not a tool, that it will change from within everything. I can give you very specific examples in ecology, in your lifestyle, in productions. No meat, no thing, a lot of things. Radical, revolutionary.
Peter.
The concept of enlightenment is not too historically compromised to positively refer to it, because you said it's an attitude and an ethos, but it has also been a historical epoch which was deeply entangled with colonialism, racism, capitalism, and maybe this should motivate us to look for better conceptions of the things you have in mind. And the other point is a question to your notion of scheme. I am wondering whether what you have in mind with this notion is more a kind of anthropological condition or anthropological possibility, which is rooted deeply in us. I think you use this wording, or is it a kind of historical anthropology, historical a priori, a concept that Herbert Marcuse has also used, but then it's more institutionalized in technologies, in economic structures, in markets, in political institutions, and so on. So what is the relation of these two, to which side would you interpret your notion of schemes, and what is the relation between the individual learning process and process of self-introspection and changing this technological a priori, to quote Marcuse?
A lot of things. First, very quickly, of course, the crimes, well, all the crimes, the colonial crimes, I do not reject them, and I explain why I do maintain the Enlightenment, but again, I will not summarize a big book. But of course, you know that Enlightenment is not only European. In Japanese, in all, there is a plurality of Enlightenment. And it will be very Eurocentric to say that the idea of autonomy, emancipation is only a continent. You have to desubstantialize Enlightenment. But I know that it's something that nowadays we cannot do. This is why my master is Derrida. And if you read Derrida, you will see that he asks us to desubstantialize Europe, like Patochka, and to desubstantialize, so to say, Enlightenment. So, but of course, and I spoke of an intellectual structure because in society, and we know we are nowadays in these things. I borrow the idea of an intellectual structure to the Jewish historian Zev Sternel, but there are people who say that the future is fixed. There are people who say that there is an essentialist order that justifies the subjugation of women and so forth. Or there are people who say that humanity is not one. There are people who say that reason is nothing. And these people are very powerful today in all countries. So it's not something very abstract, enlightenment and enlightenment. And this is one of the reasons why I said that it was very useful to find this resource, but at the same time seeing all the critiques and the self-critique, the exterior critique, but also the internal critique of rationalism and enlightenment, and there is a break so strong between the past enlightenment and the new one. But the idea of emancipation, the idea of some universalizable guidelines, and I'm also an heir of Ricoeur, who put a graph of hermeneutic on phenomenology, that is to say that it's some universalizable structures, but which can be interpreted in different contexts, because there are a lot of parts of our identity which are socially and culturally constructed. But we all will die, we all are begotten, we eat, we breathe, and for me the materiality of our existence is very, very important. Before freedom there is hunger, Levinas said. And so this is very, when we take seriously the corporeality of our existence, it changes from within everything. The way we understand human beings, the way we understand or even our freedom and everything. and politics, as I try to say. For the second question, which is very, very precise, very difficult here, scheme, well, it's not only an anthropological condition. My goal, but it's very difficult, was to understand the link between the social structures and the psyche, the subjectivity. It's not only the subjectivity, the modes of being, the Seinsweise, which inform social structure. Of course, social structure inform Seinsweise or block some interior freedom. But I wanted to coin, it's not something real, it's what we called a meta concept. That is to say that it was, for me, not to reduce the critique to the critique of capitalism, not to reduce the critique to the critique of instrumental rationalism, because I do think that there is something deeper, which has something to do with the difficulty we have to accept our earthly vulnerable condition and our finitude. So, and for me, the radical separation between nature, culture, human, animals, the repression of our, well, the repression of our own nature, as Adorno said, when he speaks of the threefold dominion. And he said, maybe it is by, he does not say reconciling, but it is by looking at this repression of our own nature that we will fight against social dominion, also dominion over nature outside us. This is why there is some things in Dialectik der Aufklärung which enable us to think of ecology as, but ecology again as a, not a solution, but as a light. But of course, ecology is not only a matter of protecting the sea, nature, landscapes. It's the word protect does not fit. It's a deep understanding of who we are. And so the scheme is, it was a meta concept which enabled me not to reduce the critique to capitalism, not to reduce things only on the individual level, and to understand the set of conscious and unconscious things, which and also it was a way of stressing the points between very different phenomena, but who all have in common not only the reification of beings, but also this dominion, this inability to this obsession of control. This well, this was, but of course it's very difficult to summarize. Well, to
Is it okay?
maybe more simple, because it's not possible to explain.
Okay, we have only
But I would like to say, I really understand why enlightenment can shock people, because of course there is all this path. But I think it was worse making this, well, why are post-colonial studies, why do they open our eyes? But in this situation, what can we do as to provide democratic answers to the challenges we have? And also, you know, well, okay.
okay.
Vielen Dank, dass ich in Deutsch fragen darf. Ich habe großes Verständnis dafür, dass Sie die Werte der französischen Aufklärung nun auch für ein postkapitalistisches Zeitalter so es kommen mag, als Lösung vorschlagen. Und jetzt kommt meine Frage. Sie schließt an die Frage, was ist das Organon des Denkens Ihrer neuen Aufklärung? Sie haben argumentiert von Descartes und Husserl, also klassische und transzendentale Logik. Der Kollege hat vorgeschlagen Dialektik, idealistische Dialektik Hegel, materialistische Dialektik Marx. Ich möchte aufmerksam machen auf einen dritten Typus, den man bei Adorno findet, in der Ästhetik. Hier hat Adorno das Naturschöne als Thema. Und er sagt, die Erfahrung des Naturschönen entzieht sich dem Bann der Identitätslogik. Das wäre sozusagen der Vorwurf an Sie. Wollen Sie nicht mit den alten identitätslogischen Mitteln sozusagen das postkapitalistische Zeitalter gestalten? Und in den Minima Moralia wird vorgeschlagen, der neue Typus der Rationalität, die das Nicht-Identische und Singuläre des Naturschönen nicht zerstört, ist die Rhetorik. Das ist der dritte Typ. Also eher klassische und transzendentale Logik, 1, 2, Dialektik in den beiden Abarten oder Rhetorik.
That is, it's very interesting. I share your view. I will answer. My answer in this book, because now I have a little bit changed. But well, I do not speak of what I'm doing now. But in this book, Das Zeitalter des Lebendigen, eine neue Philosophie der Aufklärung, my tool was the phenomenology of the living, especially coming from Merleau-Ponty, which is also a phenomenology which stresses the heterogeneity of the access to the real. I think now, of course, what is a phenomenology is interesting because it is Erfahrung, an experience. Well, real is a reality as we live it. There is a return to the Erlebnis. And this shows us what binds us with the milieu or with the others. But it's not only in a particular way, not only starting from some particular relationship I have with this milieu and this animal, as in ecofeminism. There is always in phenomenology a universalizable dimension, something, structures of existence. But I do in the capital 2 of this book, I explain the tools I have. And it is Merleau-Ponty, and I explain why and to what extent. But I really share your view concerning Minima Moralia. It's also some approaches. And again, well, it would be a misunderstanding to think that I propose a new enlightenment. I think that there is something concerning a way of accompanying a movement which is not spectacular, but which says something concerning a different way of understanding ourselves and our place in nature and with others. Alterity. Huh? Remember that I'm a kind of daughter of Emmanuel Levinas. And so I think that, and for me, it was time. When I wrote this book, I did my PhD on Leo Strauss's Critique of Enlightenment. So I have a big history with Enlightenment, which was not very cool, quite. But because I'm aware of all the drifts of Enlightenment under attack from all sides, but in the context of today, with all my friends, animal activists, like me, would like to abolish animal exploitation, only this. I was aware of all the dangers of an approach which throw overboard any universalizable and any tradition. And also, and I see, like you, anti-enlightenment very powerful. So I think it was very important. And also, you know, there are a lot of people who say we need a new narrative, a big narrative. I think it's dangerous. What is nice in enlightenment, it's an ongoing process. It was, they fail. And feminists accomplish them by criticizing them. Postcolonialists accomplish them by, and I think it's an ongoing process, but to speak of emancipation and to say, well, reason has become fool, but reason is not this, this instrument, this tool. Vernunft und Verstand, Vernunft, Vernehmen. And if we despise reason, what will become? So I wanted to do this, but now it's done, and I do something else. And maybe I'm closer to you. But so it's not a new enlightenment. It's not spectacular. It's just we live in a, and this enlightenment, do you remember that Leibniz in monadology had a very nice picture? Because normally we see enlightenment as something big, the light, millennium. No, he speaks of a city which is still, which is enlightened in a different way. From one city, but seen by different eyes, like the lateral universalism of Merleau-Ponty. You're a bird, your cat, your dog does not see the world in the way you see it. But there is one world, one Lebenswelt, and all, this is this thing.
Okay, one last question, John.
Yeah, my name's John Abromite, and so you, in your talk, you were talking about anthropological revolution that we need, and I just wanted to bring up some of the work that's been done by, well, Horkheimer in his early essay on egoism and freedom movements. It was on the anthropology of the bourgeois epoch, and so he's linking a certain type of dominant character structure which comes into being during modern capitalist societies. So it seems like there's a similarity to you know, what he's doing, but he's linking it to a critique of modern capitalism. Similarly with Marcuse, in the late 60s and early 70s, Marcuse praised the counterculture, hippies, the feminist movement, ecology movement, because he thought they were engaging in politics of the depth dimension, actually the anthropological dimension, trying to move beyond the anthropology of the bourgeois epoch. But again, he's linking it to capitalism, whereas a lot of the postmodern critics, they shift over to a more cultural type of critique of Western society or Western rationality, and the importance of capitalism seems to get, you know, somewhat downplayed, right? But isn't it the case, as you know, Stefan Lessenich just argued in his talk, that you know we need to think about capitalism again in its relation to anthropology, and don't we have some really great resources in critical theory to do that?
Of course. I was thinking when Stefan Lessenich was spoken about André Gortz, who also had a critique of capitalism as an anthropology which divides, cuts people. So of course, I think that the critique of capitalism, as you mentioned, is necessary, and it's a good thing that there are people who do this job. But we cannot, I think that when you write a book, it's because you have a roof, an appel, you have an interior necessity coming from the situation and from your own competencies, and you answer. So concerning the enlightenment, I had this answer. And when I hear your questions, because you did not have the chance to read this book, but I think that I was not mistaken, because the critiques addressed to enlightenment are very strong and still relevant, and I had to answer and to propose something else. But of course, the critique of capitalism is a very important chapter. And again, when I think that the link between this approach and what was said before is that, and when we think of Adorno and Horkheimer, is that a single person cannot do all the job. But you can answer an appel, and the point is to have a direction. And what do we want to do toward what future? What are the dangers? What do we have to avoid before what we have to do? What do we have to avoid and to make it impossible? And what can we make better? And with what tool? But I think that there are many approaches which can be combined and which can, again, be an image of enlightenment as in Merleau-Ponty or in Leibniz. Not one truth, but some layers of reality which enlighten and which also provide some guidelines for people in a concrete way. So, and which are not oppressive narratives, nor too particular narratives, and so forth. But it was not my job to do the critique of capitalism because I am not able to do that. But I'm pretty good concerning ecology, and I am pretty good concerning the history of philosophy, and I knew what was the danger. And also, just one thing, I think again that the point is the sensitivity to reality. And why do we write? We write to answer this necessary roof, appel, and to say some things. We do not write to repeat. So, and this, again, I think enlightenment means that you are not alone, that there are a direction which could inspire people or displace. But there are some dangers, and nationalism and relativism are some danger. Relativism is too feeble. And again, well, and okay, and again, you speak of colonialism, but I meet some people who only speak of animals, and it's like islands. And I wanted to provide a project which could see what is at stake in some movements which are some rendezvous with ourselves, such as feminism, post-colonial studies, animals ecology.
Thank you very much, Corine, for your statements.